Pistachios, the nut that everyone seems to love around the world. The market is continuing to grow year over year. We're seeing it expand into new countries, new marketplaces, and we're constantly seeing new plantings all over the Central Valley. Today, we have two very special guests who are really the experts when it comes to pistachios. They might say different, but between them, they have as much experience as anyone with growing pistachios in the Central Valley. They've seen fields all around the world. They are constantly in seminars learning and seeing how to best farm pistachios so that they can go back to their growers. Today, we have Chris Morgner, the CEO and president of Agri-Valley Consulting, and Joe Coelho with American Pistachio Growers. Thanks for coming on the show today, guys.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having us.
Maybe not everyone knows you. I think they're familiar a little bit around our platform with Chris, but you have a lot of experience that people might not know. You're actually pretty new to American Pistachio, right? In the last 3 months, I think it's been.
Yeah, I've been there for exactly 6 weeks.
Oh, so you're brand new.
Pretty new, APG.
But you're familiar with American Pistachio because your family grows pistachios, right?
Yeah. So I've been working in the pistachio industry for 11 years. Been farming my entire life. As a family, we didn't start planting pistachios probably until the early 2000s. My own practical experience had only, started within the last little more than a decade.
And then before then, you're also with a large farming organization as well, working on pistachios and almonds as well, or is it just pistachios predominant?
No, it's pistachios and almonds. I was the agronomy lead for a large grower in the valley here. And and made the move over to APG in the last so many weeks, particularly because of keen interest I have in sustainable farming pistachios from previous experience and organic production of pistachios as well.
Chris, a lot of people probably know you, especially in that northern side of the state, because at some point, I feel like most growers who have been in this valley farming for 60 years, especially in that Merced, Chowchilla, Madera area, has called you at some point to get some advice. You're a well-respected PCA. You've been independent for your whole career, correct?
Correct.
And that's pretty rare to find someone who's been independent for as long as you have.
It is. And it was a conscious choice.
Why was it a conscious choice? Why do you say that?
Kind of goes back to my education of things. I graduated from the University of Missouri. I was the 9th graduate in their IPM program. So I had a very idealistic education. And of course, when you're in college, you have these idealistic tendencies, right? So I came from Missouri. I grew up in a suburb in St. Louis. Loved nature, outdoors, floated rivers in my teenage years, and went to school to be a forestry major. And thank God I had a moment of coming to Jesus in my freshman year, which eventually settled me into a path that led me into the IPM. I took an entomology class, and that professor saw my interest in entomology, and he said, "You need to be in this IPM program." So being in the Midwest, there wasn't a lot of opportunity there to practice that, to be a practitioner in that integrated pest management area. So I looked west, California, found a job checking fields. 1978, I moved here and started my business in 1980.
Always out of Merced.
We lived in Merced the whole time.
And you say there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that IPM pathway out in the Midwest. Is that because out there they don't run on PCAs and CCAs as much? It's more of like a crop advisor, and it's corn and soybean predominantly?
Right. It's, there's a lot of, the big crops.
Mm-hmm.
There is some good consulting companies there, and they focus on agronomy. And, after doing this consulting business for 44 years, I really like wearing my agronomy cap. Okay. But back then, I didn't have really a training necessarily in agronomy. It was more in the pest part of it. And so there wasn't too many consulting companies back there.
So too many independent consulting companies.
Right.
Because you don't really want to be a sales.
There was a lot of co-ops that, had their advisors and sales guys, but now there's quite a few good independent consulting companies, and they do agronomy and pests.
Okay. So you see yourself more as a agronomist over a pest control? I know you do, but
Well, we definitely, this is the time of year when it's all on us to protect this crop into the barn, right?
yeah.
So it's really important right now. But, our agronomy has already been kind of set in place, and now it's just a matter of protecting it to get it to harvest. So yeah, that's a major cap right now, like a pest management. But certainly the agronomy is, I mean,
Sometimes.
I delve into that more because I'm real interested in irrigation and getting my clients to irrigate properly, because it's so crucial to yields. There's all kinds of, and as Joe was talking earlier, before we started our podcast about value-added fertilizers.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things you can do with fertilizers, but I don't think they influence things as much as water.
Yeah.
So
I know every time you and I talk about, fertilizers, everything else, is it going to bring back a 2 or 3x return? If so, it's not worth it for me in my eyes, right?
Right.
A lot of times you're looking for that investment to pay off.
Oh yeah.
Joe, I mean, are you seeing the same thing?
No, I agree completely with what Chris is saying. Actually, you saw almond prices turn down 2020, right? So some of the first things to go out of a grower's agronomy budget was spend on that value-added, carbon-based, this or that, the humics, biologicals, whatever. And you could say that had some effect on nitrogen use efficiency. Sure. But the effect that the simultaneous drought had on the reduced water allocation wasn't quite, it was just far more than the effects of taking the value-added nitrogen products out, nitrogen efficiency products out of the spin. That certainly had something to do with it, but dialing in irrigation, bar none, is the best thing that you can definitely do, and orchard crops at least. Almond and pistachio are two different animals for sure. But yeah, no, I would agree with Chris's take on that. Can we run with this irrigation for no?
I'm going to go for it.
Couple things. So I find clients that don't really understand their flow rate. They may know that they have emitters that put out so many gallons per hour, and they know that their system, when it was put in, was designed to put this much on. But they're committing the two sins of irrigation oftentimes, or one of the two sins, which is casual and convenient. And what I mean by that, casual is, I'm irrigating, but they don't have a calculated amount, a goal for that week. And maybe they don't even know their true flow rate, or maybe they haven't measured it lately, or at least checked their flow meters to see what the flow is and how many gallons per hour they're actually putting on. So they just run something convenient.
As far as the hours, 12, 24, will they put it together with a 12, 12, 12 during the week? Or do they go 24 and then the 12? Or do they go 24, 24? It's just, it comes down to convenience. So the thing that I see making a difference is automation. Because then if you calculate and you know your flow, you know how many hours, then you can automate it so that you get frequency through the week and get the right amount of hours on. And that's made a huge difference.
Chris, do you think that, so earlier in your arrival in California in the early 80s, do you feel like there was a lot more convenience approach to irrigation that was taken at that point? Or was it just exclusively that? I mean, because ET measurements were around at that point. I mean, but were people actually...
No.
People
were still flood irrigating then.
They were just
Joe.
looking and...
Joe, that was 1980. There was no
Not
real
against flood irrigation entirely, but, you know, I still flood.
Nothing wrong with if you do it right, but people were irrigating like once every 2 weeks. You know, if the trees were green, that was good enough. Okay.
We can't do that anymore.
No. Interesting, all of our crops, pistachio and almond, they kind of acclimate to their environment, right? So if you give them a drier environment, they'll do okay. They'll kind of stay green. They're not yielding because they're not putting on growth and all that, right? So you're not differentiating your flower buds in the late summer. So yeah, I just think that the move towards micronized or the drip and the sprinkler low pressure systems has just revolutionized how we can farm, how we can irrigate our crops, and where we can farm. When I came here in 1980, all the good ground was used up, right? It was all the river bottom ground, all the alluvial ground next to the creeks. All the good ground was gone. Was anybody going to sell that? No. They were making money on that. So where did you have to go? You had to go to the alkali ground. Mm-hmm. You saw that transition, I'm sure, Joe.
Surely. I mean, it wasn't always alkali ground. I mean, there was this fertile area in West Fresno County that traditionally had 100% allocation from the onset of the Central Valley Project until Endangered Species Act, basically, and we started getting our water allocations curtailed, and then pumping began. That's really when it became saline sodic.
Yeah.
So it's some of the deepest, best soils on the planet are just otherwise compromised from pumping.
Hey, are you fueled up for harvest this year? Call Vanderpool or the Ag Center to make sure that all your tanks are filled and ready to go for all the machines heading out to the field in just a short time. We'll see you there.
Pumping.
But in my area, we had hard pan soils, hard pan at 28 inches. If you didn't rip it out, you weren't going to farm it. It was very expensive. People weren't farming almonds on Fresno loam, right? On Fresno El Pico soil types, or you name it. But that micro or low pressure systems allowed us to do more. And rootstocks, obviously, especially with almond, but even with pistachio, look at the rootstock advancements, huh? Huge.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously Integrima changed the whole game, but UCB1, Pioneer Gold, then UCB1 changed things, and then UCB1 was semi-compromised in germplasm anyway, and then there's a lot of other improvements, but it's just the evolution of any sort of tree industry.
Well, now they selected the best UCB ones, right, and created hybrids.
Exactly. Call it something
or clones,
else.
Or whatever.
They took the salinity with it, and they took the vigor with it, right? So
yeah.
With the water and that irrigation conversation, I mean, Josh and I were just in a block this morning, and we're seeing it a lot. Josh and I on the east side of Madera, the water quality now is the next big piece as well. I mean, we're seeing a lot of pH problems. I think they're really switching because of Sigma. It seems like that east side of Madera is not getting that quality of water. And we were in, you can just tell that there's probably a pH problem immediately, extremely yellowing in the trees.
Were you in MID or were you in white zone?
I think we were in white.
Well, then they're pumping.
Exactly. And it doesn't seem like they were treating that pumped water.
Well, just like the growers that were using witchcraft to predict their irrigation needs. I mean, it's kind of the same thing when you're just guessing that I'm just gonna put water and I'm gonna be okay, and you're not treating your water. It's like that's your nutrient availability really isn't there, and then it's kind of the Liebig's law of the minimum, like the limiting factor. Everything spews out of the barrel. Everybody's seen that whole depiction of things, So if you miss it on one thing, then it's a limiting factor on everything else. So, but yeah, I mean, those are some of those antiquated approaches to farming that we were talking about. That we kind of have to overcome, I think, as an industry to succeed generally. But you were saying you saw orchards that seem to have yellowing and have chlorosis and light green color and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we were seeing up there, and you're also seeing an infiltration problem. That water was not getting down, and so there was a lot of standing water, and the irrigation sets were off. So maybe they shut them off that morning or something like that, but still, it was 110 outside, right? The standing water, irrigation's been off for a few hours. You really shouldn't be seeing that. So there's probably a lot of
they're
bigger
losing water
problems.
to evaporation.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those are all things. It's like you want to sharpen your pencil. It's like, well, I need to improve my soil water infiltration. I need to improve the pH of my water, and so just right there, growers aren't considering those things. It's just like, what is it going to take to get that grower to even think in that mode?
Oftentimes it's the bicarbonates in the water. Some of
Yeah,
these
sure.
waters have high bicarbonate, especially an older well that's shallower.
Right.
Ooh, I've seen some 6s. You got it. Because once that bicarbonate gets in the soil and dries, it becomes lime. Calcium carbonate.
Right.
What's that do to a tree? Makes it yellow.
Yeah. So, the grower probably isn't trying to react that bicarbonate with sulfuric or anything.
And that can be treated.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, back to pistachio irrigation, though. What do you think about the regulated deficit irrigation regime? Have you tried it?
No,
Okay.
I have not. Actually, I was never an irrigation manager at my previous role.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily want to make too many comments on that. Suffice to say, I believe that the deficit period is around shell hardening.
Shell hardening,
Yeah.
Mid-May
Yeah.
to end of June.
Exactly. So what I've gathered over the years, talking with the irrigation managers, is if you're going to do it at any time, it's that period, mid-May to mid-June. Once you start nut fill, the water demand goes through the roof.
Yes.
So
To that point, there's like a 6-week period there when you can go like a 50% deficit. And if you did, it could be like 4.5 inches savings. Significant.
sure.
They also explored this in the post-harvest period. So it'd be like 8 weeks, probably whenever harvest is, right before harvest, mid-September, let's call it. Okay.
Yep.
And the savings is not as big. It's almost 3 inches, but there's 7.5 inches.
Yeah, the post-harvest irrigation is an interesting thing.
They're still
And obviously-
irrigating, but they're only going 25% instead of the
full ET.
KC, ET.
Yeah. It's interesting. Talking to different growers, they have different perspectives on post-harvest irrigation and fertility, for that matter, on
Right.
pistachios,
Right.
which I don't believe that there is much of a bit of guidance around pistachios. Suffice to say, I've seen articles that say, well, depending on what your July tissues were, you can do this or that. It's like, okay. But I don't think there's any sort of protocol there. There's also people that irrigate later than others. But where I came from, we cut the water pretty early, especially on younger trees.
Oh, yeah.
Quote unquote, harden them off for the
Yes.
winter for chill and frost risk and things like that. But, I guess in theory, on a larger tree, when you have high heat in October and November, you need water to cool tree needs water to cool itself. So I think running it bone dry is not the right thing, but if you can be strategic and be at 25%, then you probably, be pretty safe. Because God knows we've had those falls that are hot.
Oh my gosh.
You know, we'll have Decembers that are hot, but then you don't have leaves necessary to pull the water.
Right.
I guess, you know, in some cases you might, but yeah, what do you do? You know, there were growers even in, say, in 2015, the really bad drought year, that were irrigating. And I've seen this happen in December, January, just because there's no rain and it was warm, and they're putting little bits of water out. And I guess in theory, like, you still can have a little bit of pool. Trees still will try to cool
Still
itself.
respiring. It's a little
Right.
bit even in the winter.
So I don't think that was a bad idea. It's not like you have to put, you know, 6 inches of water out or something
Well,
like that,
certainly
because you'll
when
fill the profile
Certainly
fast.
when it bloomed, they better have some moisture.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, for sure.
You looking for an extra hand during labor, or you need full crews? Call Pacific Farm Management or the Ag Center. Or maybe you haven't booked your almond harvest yet. Call the Ag Center. Let's help you get it figured out for this upcoming season. What have you guys seen? You talked about it on that fall fertilizer. What have you seen work really well in pistachios? I know it's not a tailored approach across all this acreage and the different regions that we're in, but what does a pistachio grower need to make sure that that's in that mix at least? I'm sure there's one or two things. We're trying to limit that boron, right, in pistachios, but what else is in there?
My experience is that I don't have any conclusive results on anything that I've tried to do in post-harvest with nitrogen or potassium. Potassium, post-harvest, sure, you can put it in any point. But nitrogen fertilization, like you would do in almond,
Yeah.
at 50 units or whatever, I've seen no differences there. There are foliar applications that are targeted to sugar movement and starch storage that are made at navel orangeworm timing. I started doing some research on those things in the last few years, and those have been, you know, fairly standard approaches that some people will make in their foliar fertilizer during those spray timings. So, you know, a fertilizer with the analysis of like 5, 15, 40 or something like that, kind of higher PK blends. Yeah, but I don't know. What have you seen, Chris?
You know, I haven't done any experiments or looked closely, tried to do trials or anything, but my approach would be to say that there's not a whole lot of demand going on in that tree. Your buds formed way back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so amazing when you pay attention to how these pistachios grow. Once they go through their initial growth into the middle of May, all the buds are at the leaf axils, right?
Mm-hmm.
For next year. They're already there. Not to say that there isn't some influence of how you manage your orchard through the year that will influence how those play out next year, whether they're vegetative, fruity,
retained and
right?
whatnot,
Yeah, or retained, exactly. But I don't think there's a lot of demand going on, so I would think that it probably is more a feel-good thing to put something on.
Mm-hmm.
That's my buzzword. It's feel good.
Hey, you pointed out, you know, that the tree from dormancy break up until, you know, basically to nut fill, like you're putting on next year's crop, and it makes me, you know, brings me back to the irrigation point that, like, kind of makes me a little bit nervous about RDI during that period.
Yeah.
You know, because it does indeed all take place kind of, you know, in that time frame. But and if you look at the carbohydrate portfolio of pistachio, you store starch and then it converts and you spin the sugar. And the sugar spend starch, you peak out in starch about November 1st. And then it goes into a sugar spend, and then it goes down to zero starch and sugar, almost down to nothing, right at the start of nut fill. So it's like it spent all of its energy,
All its
damn near,
resources.
on growing the tree, putting on leaves, putting on buds, putting on hull and shell with a little baby embryo, and all it has to do after that is grow your nuts. You know, so yeah. I try to be very careful about water, and I've typically on all the stuff that I manage don't cut corners on ET. You know, I use soil moisture probes and things like that to look at all my depths and look at volume ionic content with a Centec probe, but I still write my schedules based on my system flow rate and what my 2-week ET is, and write updated schedules every week. So,
Yep.
So you're doing all your irrigation scheduling then basically on a tech approach. You don't actually have a, like I know a lot of companies will hire out a actual irrigation schedule or something like that. You're taking a more tech advantage approach on it.
well, I mean, I also use the good old USDA touch feel.
Yeah.
You know, I have a soil auger and a core and a
Yep. And you make the
grab and
ribbon,
feel.
right?
Sure. I went to college too, you know, and they teach you how to make the ribbons and see your thumb print and stuff.
The emphasis is you're monitoring,
Yeah.
whether it be physically or through the technology of sensors, or even now there's tree sensors. That's going to be a big deal in the future.
So I've used, and I still have dendrometers out.
Yeah.
I did at one point try to use the Phytech system, and you know, it definitely gives you some stress readings on your deltas on your dendrometer. So that's another thing. So I do use a tech approach. I don't pay someone else to do it necessarily.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you're an agronomist, you know, I know Chris is the same way. It's like, I think you should be looking at all those things simultaneously. Not to say that like you can't specialize in just bugs and weeds or something, and you can hire out your fertility and you can hire out your irrigation to these things, but anymore, those are just 2 additional bills. It's kind of nice to package yourself as, you know, kind of an expert of all those things if you're a seasoned agronomist anyway.
I call it general practitioner.
There you go.
The
I like
GP. People ask me,
GP.
well, what do you do? Well, I'm a GP of crops.
Yeah, plant doctor.
Yeah.
Is there any other technology that you've kind of used out in your field? And Chris, you farm too. I don't know if a lot of people know that as well. You farm almonds.
Yes.
Is there some technology outside of just soil moisture probes
Yeah, I
that
mean,
you guys have adapted to?
I've tried everything, but it's like, how much redundancy do you need to come up with a decision?
Yeah.
Ultimately, like pressure chamber, neutron probes.
Right.
You know, I like to see the soil moisture, but it's not always representative of what it actually is. Sometimes it'll say it's dry. Sometimes it might say it's wet. Depends on the placement of the probe. Usually I try to get them placed in a wetting pattern, so you know, but like that in ET, it's like pretty good. I probably can get away with just using ET, but I like to see the moisture. So I have a budget of about $10 that I'm willing to spend for irrigation.
Yeah.
For irrigation technology or?
Yeah, for the technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, are you measuring is it recording flow out of your systems?
No, I just know what it is.
Okay.
You asked me, they're like 0.5,
Yeah.
0.6. You know,
I think
so-
that's a point you could explore in the future. I mean,
I
there's
agree.
definitely.
So this text, you can, I believe, like ask them to adapt it to your dashboard. I just never have.
Yeah.
So I'll usually see something. If I know I'm getting a 1/2 inch per 24 or something like that, I know what my ET is, then it's pretty easy for me to just make a schedule
Sure.
off of that, you know?
Sure.
But I would like it. So I guess to that end, I do have flow sensors. They don't necessarily, they record your on off. So it'll tell you how many hours you ran. So if you know what your flow rate is, then you can just calculate it backwards off of the time that
Sure.
was running.
Sure. You know how many hours?
Yeah, and get to the end of the season, I could say like, well, you know, I ran like 2,000 hours
Yeah.
or something like that, divided by your flow rate
Right.
per hour, per
Okay.
day, whatever.
Okay.
So I'm not that sophisticated, I guess, but I'm not just, you know, going off the way the tree looks.
How about imagery?
Yeah, well, what you use it?
well-
I have, but I don't. I stopped using it because it's just another spend.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, just the basic NDVI is okay. If something's grossly wrong, it'll show.
So you think there's a decent place for imagery, but it's not a super frequent thing?
Well, right now, so imagery is being offered in some of these platforms from Phytech and some of the automation companies. They're-
Agri-Valley has it on the satellite.
Yeah, that's all satellite. It's not
Fixed wing,
high
drone.
resolution, right? The satellite is not. You can't see your trees or your rows. Okay, it's like 30 feet. You get the Get the high resolution, usually shot with an airplane.
Yeah, like a series imagery versus.
Yeah, like this. Okay, so that you can see each individual tree. It's like 2 foot, I think. I might be wrong, maybe 3. Okay, but what I'm getting to is that I don't think they're there yet, but they are calculating KC values and maybe measuring ET. So I think we're going to see more accurate field level information with some of the imagery. And it just has to be, like you say, not just another spend. It has to be something that you're going to use, that you're going to have confidence in. And who knows, it might save you some money.
Yeah, I hear you on that, and
It's being developed
to see
right now.
granularity. Right. No, I've heard of it, and I know that the company Landscan basically does something very similar to where, you get this granular data down to the tree level, and then you can irrigate to 80% or to whatever the average is. You don't just have you do have a one-size-fits-all approach still,
Right.
but you can choose the right ET level based on what your field looks like and get you down to this granular level. But you only have so much precision you can do off of this overabundance of data. If you know exactly what every last tree is yielding, like that's a great thing. It might cost you a lot of money to arrive at that decision. And I don't think that the imagery is that expensive necessarily, but doing all these things to arrive with, at this point where you have all this data, I know where I'm losing money on down to the tree level, but growers can ultimately arrive at the exact same management conclusions with like a $10 spend based on the confines of what their management, allows them to do or what they can do. You only have certain bones underneath. You can only irrigate them in certain ways. We don't necessarily have precision pest control and spray. We have precision dry application. We could do variable rate application of that kind of stuff. So do you ever, in some of your consulting work, do you ever have anybody putting in like smart irrigation systems like the WiseCon system, or creating management zones or much smaller controlled management zones, or is it still your typical massive lateral system with risers?
I have not worked with a single customized to the soil type irrigation system.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think it was moving in that direction, and I think it must have died.
I know that is one thing you didn't see in Spain, but I know that the Spanish and then some people I believe in Chile, have developed systems that literally are adaptable to various soil types and all these sorts of things.
They might have some
variables
topography issue. We're kind of flat.
Yeah, sure. I mean that you can deliver the right amounts of water to the right places. And, it can be variable with water delivery with more precision than, we're going to turn off that third of the field and, because that side is okay. It's I wish there was a way to be more precise, but, unfortunately with permanent plantings, the system is basically permanent. I don't think that these things are necessarily permanent anymore. I don't think they are for almonds, probably much lesser extent. I think Kerman will be ripped out eventually as well. And replaced with Golden Hills. That might be a ways down the road, and then you have a chance to gut it. But it's like, if it works, do you want to invest another $2, maybe it's $4,000 then to put the system in? I don't necessarily know. But I think as far as maximizing your profitability, like bringing up all levels of your orchard, is something that we have to try to figure out how to do. You can obviously irrigate, fertilize, spray to like the least common denominator in a field, but how can you utilize all this granularity of data and improve your crop on every tree? Yeah, tough problem to solve.
I agree.
It's been a lack in the tech space, right? There's just too many options, and you can't put all that data.
I would say there's definitely an overabundance of options,
Yeah.
and I feel like tech often comes in without a plan for like putting that cool offering into any form of management.
The practical.
Right.
Yeah, you get a lot of data, but it's hard to use it sometimes.
Yeah, even on the imagery. It's like when they came out with higher res imagery from a fixed wing, it's like, yeah, it's cool. I like it. And I feel like there's value in it in finding like irrigation system problems. So an assessment maybe once a year or once every year the other year to see if you have issues with laterals, with pressure regulators, things like that. It's like, cool. You can also see leaks. That's something that you probably already have someone in the field checking to begin with, but
You should.
if you have it at high frequency, then at least the imagery that you're taking, then maybe you can be out there, using the imagery to go fix those problems. But ultimately, I think the imagery I guess my original point on that was that they came in and they have this great map, and it's like, there you go, farmer.
Now what?
Go pay. It's like, okay. And so, it was interesting to do that work for a while. And there is some correlation to the water stress index that is used in some of this imagery to stem water potential. And I think that's good. And I think you can create some linear management zones out of it. But when you have non-linear patterns in your orchards, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You can go out there with an EM38 or with Landscan digital soil core or something like that, and you can do variable rate dry.
Right. But that's about it.
What else?
Yeah.
Do linear. Anyway, yeah. But on these newer metrics in terms of soil health, this huge buzz around soil health, like the Valley labs don't have a lot of ability to do the work. They don't have the respiration Haney test. They don't have the Illinois soil nitrogen, which I don't even think it'll work here, but they can do total nitrogen, total organic carbon, bulk density, OM, C to N, and aggregate stability. So those are all like pretty relevant metrics when you think about soil health. And I would say that in a quarter of applications, so 3 months worth of applications and every drop of the water being treated, that I think it was 4 out of 6 of those metrics were improved to a 95 or 99% confidence interval, like a pretty big swing. Almost a 1% difference in the organic matter. The only thing that didn't really change, which I would expect over time, that had the least amount of movement, was aggregate stability. I would think that's the ability of an aggregate to stay together in the presence of sodium, essentially. I would expect that to improve over time as the sodium is moved or pushed out a little bit. But an interesting product, and I'm still doing R&D on it now. I'm looking at various commodities, and but it's a lot of things like that require some defining of economics. If you're talking sustainability now, like that one at least has an abundance of literature. Actually, like writing an application to get microalgae recognized as one of the CDFA healthy soils practices. Because I think it's worth the subsidy, and I think that there's an abundance of literature on it, but it's the everyday sales guy that shows up with a bug and a jug. It's like, look, man, you're spending this with those guys. Like, you can buy this for $25.
Right.
Cut your nitrogen in half. It's like,
right.
Let me see the studies on that. It's like, wow.
So, to your point, it's impressive if you saw some change, because these aren't easy things to change in the soil.
Nothing else changed, but those soil health deals did.
Yeah, that's impressive. So that's one thing that I constantly sort of battle is, if farming was easy enough to just buy a jug of stuff and put it on, what art would there be in it, right? What science would there be in it? And everybody wants to have a little magic bullet. They want to have a jug. They want to have something they can spray on the trees, something they can put through their drip, their micros. Most of them do absolutely nothing. But
Or the answer that they have for you is a greenwashed, like,
Right.
well, this is what it's going to do.
Well, what I always say, when you go to those websites of each one of those companies, it looks like they cut and paste the same thing to each of their opening pages. They all say the same thing. They're all going to increase your yields 10 to 20%, blah, blah, blah. Now, but to your point of soil health, and I believe you mentioned earlier about carbon,
Yeah.
and that kind of an input into the soil. We've definitely seen a cutback. We've seen, we had people who were doing compost every year, 5 tons of compost. They were doing maybe some additive to their irrigation water. That, there's lots of products out there that will add carbon.
Yeah.
We've seen a big drop in that usage.
Your growers are pulling those out.
Yeah.
So what do? Go back to the meat and potatoes?
They're going back to the basics, man. The raw basics.
Is that a cost thing that they're doing it for,
Well,
or they're
no.
just not seeing enough benefits?
Especially like this year with the crop they had last year and the price the way it is, they just didn't have any money. Okay. It was just, that was it.
It was a cost
And the year before, we had escalated costs, particularly in fertilizers that were, kind of ridiculous, really. But
It might have been what you're saying too, that they're not realizing the successes of what they're doing with some of those practices as well. So we have this block grant at APG of $5 million where we're able to award our members with checks for implementation of conservation management practices, which, to no surprise, like 95% of the applicants were compost guys, right? So that's just one of the primary functions of my job is the implementation of that. Not the primary, but it's one of the main.
Hey, you're hearing it right now in this conversation. Compost is an important key for your pistachios and your almonds and so many other crops in the Central Valley. Make sure to get your orders in early and make sure that you know how much you want to put on in your field. Call the Ag Center or call Kane Trucking to make sure that we get the compost in your field this year.
It's interesting to see now when you've seen these growers pull these things out, like, are there any immediate effects that you're seeing?
Well, so they are changing, many of them are changing their approach to their fertilizer programs, their nutrient programs, nutrient management, in terms of they're just utilizing more in-season fertigation. We're trying, instead of dumping all this SOP, MOP on the soil in the fall when there's no demand and there's no uptake, we're starting to rethink that a little bit and say, well, what about if we just forego all that? Yeah, I used to think, hey, we got to build our soils up. It's still probably a valid,
I still think you can bank a lot of those things too, though, right? I mean, at least if it's K or if it's positively charged.
Right. And there's some, I'm going to tell you right now, I know for sure there's some soils that are more responsive to that approach than others. Okay. For instance, in Merced, we have a lot of creeks that go through the area from Chowchilla all the way up, to Turlock. There's just a lot of, feeder creeks that go through, right? All of those areas, almost to every single one of them, are low in we always have low potash in our trees. They're young alluvials. They don't have and so we've tried to build up. It takes tremendous amounts, like 1,000 pounds per acre of material. So 500 to 600 pounds of K2O to start making any difference. So we said, well, do we have to do it that way, or can we feed it through the microbes when the crop needs it and is in demand? So we're trying that.
I'm with you.
So
on
far,
that.
the success is good, but
Knock, knock. Harvest is around the corner. Give the Ag Center a call, and let's get you in with Kane Trucking or G3 Logistics to make sure that your nuts are hauled this year.
I think you and I actually probably worked on that same thing together on the crops that we worked on his ranches in Merced.
yeah.
And I understand that approach, and I've definitely been part of it, especially if the ownership of the orchards, is positioned in a certain way where they don't necessarily want to embed a ton of cost on the early part of the crop year. So say that crop year starts in post-harvest. It's like you can technically, you don't have to put nitrogen on. I think a lot of people do based on what their summer tissues look like, but you could also do what you're saying and go in season with liquids, and then you don't have this embedded like $500 an acre of all this dry. Now, but I see it that way, and I also agree that certain soils handle this stuff differently.
They do.
And I remember seeing the NRCS maps of the ranch that we were looking at there, and it has these fans to just go up and down. You have like 50 different soil types on one section of almond. And I had never seen anything like that, and I'm glad that I don't
Welcome
farm
to
in
my
Merced.
life. when you go out on the west side and you have a whole section of the same soil type.
Yeah, exactly. You might, there's a few different types, but the soil types are still
They're
pretty
similar, where we have these differences in how that alluvial was laid down, and is it coarse or is it, did it expose the clay?
Sand.
Did it
Yeah.
There's alkaline spots. There's definitely big changes across a section for sure. In Chowchilla, we have 6 soil types in 40 acres sometimes.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's a harder bit of management than I've had to deal with, to be really honest with you, because if you have something that has just like a higher sand content, like a much higher sand content, and then you have something that's heavier, and it's all intermingled, like those are different.
Those are
interesting
challenges
wrinkles,
Yeah, for irrigation.
right? And for fertility, I suppose. But like, you probably fertilize to one soil type, and some of the stuff might be luxurious amounts, but you don't want to compromise some of this other stuff that you might be losing stuff through the soil profile just because it doesn't have a whole lot of CEC. So that's an interesting deal.
Joe, you and I have talked about this a little bit, and you said it a little bit earlier as well. You've really taken a different approach to nitrogen in the last few years, or maybe a lot of the time that you've been in pistachios more. Your units, you're not trying to hit the textbook 300 units or anything like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And Chris, chime in too. I know that it's an important piece on both sides.
I don't want to pretend like I have it all figured out, but I want to say that I think that nitrogen needs another look, because I think that our approach to nitrogen fertilization in all commodities is fairly antiquated. And I think that a lot of it is based off of static nitrogen plots that have existed since like the 1880s and through the 1950s. And normally a nitrogen rate is decided based on a yield estimate and a crop removal, like how much nitrogen is in that crop when you take it out,
Right.
minus your water nitrate nitrogen and soil nitrate nitrogen, and then you have
And potential
this
your
input.
tree storage.
Yeah, I suppose, but if you're removing it, I don't know. Maybe I don't necessarily like take that into account. I usually just add 50 pounds or 25 pounds, and then depending on the tree for tree growth.
Right.
But
What
either way-
I guess what I'm getting at is when I say tree storage, we can see this
Yeah.
one in the transition to organic. We start out maybe July leaf levels in almond of let's just say 3%. Okay. And by year 3, I mean, we're trying to put nitrogen on. We're putting compost. We're putting pellets with, the pelletized. We're putting,
Yep.
foliars or liquids, whatever we can get that's organic. And by the end of year 3, we're down to 1.9. So the tree had some storage and it kind of used it up.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear that.
And I've seen that with my own, Sam mentioned that I'm growing almonds also. Okay, so I do a lot of experimenting because I can, right? And one thing I've done, I noticed that when I switched to weekly or even bi-weekly fertigation injections of fertilizer, I noticed that I was being more efficient because I wasn't putting that much nitrogen on, but my leaf levels were high.
That's in your almonds, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I had very similar struggles in the organic almonds that I farmed for a lot of years, where the nitrogen started good in your summer tissues, but over time they've dropped below that 2% level, and it's always low. And you can throw the kitchen sink at it, and it's difficult to get it to come up.
It's
even
difficult.
with just straight liquid injection. So I don't count on a lot of the value of the compost. I don't count on any of the value of the compost really for nitrogen. I put a lot of the 13% pellets. I put the 10-2/8 and all those things out. But anymore, when I'm not moving the needle with those, I've just kind of repurposed that spend in almond directly into some sort of liquid, because I feel like I'm delivering it a lot more efficiently than letting it just break down on the soil surface.
Right.
But the pistachio is a little bit different thing there, though. But I wanted to make the point about rewriting the textbook here, because there's this old approach that's based off of these predictions of yield and things like that, and it's like, okay, well, I can do that for any crop then, but how is it then that surely you harvest 1,000 pounds of pistachios and you sample the nitrogen out of it and it has 28 pounds of nitrogen in it. It's like, well, surely that was the removal. But year after year after year after year, I'm not putting the amount that's suggested by this old method. And I'm actually putting like 90% less than what's recommended from the yields I'm getting, and I guess I just ask, like, what gives on that? So those numbers can be down to like 50 pounds an acre, 35 pounds an acre. And that's using tons of liquid. In pistachios, I am doing compost now for soil amendments, essentially, and on all my pistachios for that matter. But it's just an interesting thing. But I think about the differences between almond and pistachio. It's like the floor condition is obviously, it has to have something to do with it. You leave carbon debris in pistachios. Not everybody does. There's plenty of orchards you go out and you'll see scorched earth.
Yeah.
And there's nothing going on there.
The desert.
Yeah.
It's in a pistachio orchard.
That's what an almond orchard kind of needs to look like, because you're harvesting from the ground.
Yeah.
So you have all of this embedded carbon into your system already, and it doesn't take a lot of work to just go pull a bunch of soil samples and look at the carbon nitrogen ratios and see that it's a bit higher in pistachios. So I think the nitrogen use efficiency is higher. I guess when you kind of ask certain people, like, well, so what gives? And they're like, well, look, it's an immutable fact that, like, you remove that, then you need to replace it. I'm like, well, I get it, but, like, I'm not replacing it. And I only stumbled upon that because I didn't want to sink the ship, like trying to transition orchards, and do unit matching. Because if I'm going to put on 300 pounds of nitrogen in organic form during a transition period where you're getting conventional pricing, it's like, yeah, you're going to lose a lot of money.
A lot.
And so the spend was a dial-up because they're also fairly younger trees, and the yield has not stopped climbing. So when you get 5,000+ pounds, and the suggestion is that you basically needed over 300 pounds routinely to supply the deficit of nitrogen, but you're applying a tenth of that. Like, and you ask the question, what gives, to the people that are in charge of the books. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I believe it is immutable, that it came out of the crop. You ask them, where did it come from? It's like, well, it's either your input, the soil, or the water. It's like, well, it's not the water and
Or the
nitrate,
efficiency of
nitrogen.
how you're putting it on.
Sure.
That's. I mean, you
You
might
still
be
are
getting
measuring your
better
units.
utilization.
I agree with that. I think that it is coming from the soil, but for sure it is. If you're putting it in the right place, the right time, then I think you're dialing it in. You can still measure the units that you're putting out on these organic forms, but I don't think that there's any consideration into the biodiversity of the soil biome, the various species of bacteria that are working your nitrogen for you, and an overall assessment of nitrogen efficiency as a function of a healthy soil. I think it needs to be looked at a little bit differently, because when I'm making those kinds of yields on a fraction of the nitrogen, it's just not like urea, it's not UAN32, it's just a bunch of different fish, food waste, hydrolysates,
your
and all that
proteins,
kind of stuff.
right? All kinds of proteins.
Exactly. It's totally diverse bits of nitrogen. It's like there's something else going on there, and I don't want to pretend like I am a soil nitrogen expert. But I could say that repeated on a lot of acreage over a lot of time, that there's definitely something going on there, and I've been able to reproduce that same thing in a lot of places. It's like if I can basically spend roughly the same amount with organic fertilizer and get the same yields in pistachio. I'm not saying this for almond. So I'd have to spend more money in the almond. It's a different deal. Then I think that's something that I can lean into pretty safely. It's still something that needs a little more explorations. It's part of what I'm trying to do at APG. It's kind of one of the tenets of my position.
There's a lot that goes on at the cellular level.
Yeah.
Is how that nitrogen that the plant takes up is utilized.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some more efficiency there.
Have you tried the Nutritia product?
I've had a big interest in these bacteria nitrogen fixing products.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really hard. You're not going to see anything visually if you put an application on. There's Nutritia, there's Pivot Bio, there's Invita. There's a bacteria from a place in Australia, and it's called, now I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's a freeze-dried bacteria. You solutionize it, put it through the irrigation water. So there's a lot of work going on in this area. I've seen some research results that were replicated. We're talking corn, we're talking the major crops, right?
Yeah.
I've seen some on some vegetables that was compelling. So I think we're going to see some usage of that, or some utilization as they get more information.
Do you think, Chris, that nitrogen is going to be further regulated going down the road here in the state? Kind of following suit with, like, say, the Netherlands, the nitrogen crisis and all that kind of stuff, and then it's going to be kind of incumbent upon the growers to employ nitrogen use efficiency products as a function of the ability to be able to nitrogen fertilize. Like say they come in and say, well, you can only apply this much nitrogen, but you're able to apply it in this form, and your efficiency rates should get you up, and it's going to look like you're using this rate. You think that there's some future in nitrogen regulation?
I would say absolutely. And I think a couple of reasons. One, the nitrates in rural well water is a big problem, right? And it's all being blamed on ag. Okay, so we've got a finger pointing at us. Secondly, I think when we see what has taken place, we started out just reporting our yield and how much nitrogen we put on in our coalition reports,
right.
Correct? Mm-hmm. And now you're reporting how much water you put on. Because I always laughed at these these reports because I thought, well, they're not even asking you how much irrigation you're putting on.
Yeah.
Big factor, right?
Yeah, I do now. I get 3 acre feet or whatever.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
now
you're
they're
reporting
asking,
water
they
nitrogen.
want to know what your nitrogen in the water is and what
Your soil residual of nitrate, nitrogen.
They want more and more information. So I think that's a trend.
It's still technically rooted in the old ways of looking at it through just basically nitrate, nitrogen.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I wonder if there's shift because there's all these, groups that are trying to define regenerative agriculture, trying to define sustainable pest management, which, it's not nitrogen necessarily, but, our state, leans to the green side on a lot of these things. I want to be ahead of the exploration on the nitrogen piece because I do believe it's going to be a point of regulation ultimately. And, I don't want to be swept away in the chaos of all that stuff, so.
Looking to rip out an orchard this year? Give the Ag Center a call. Let us get you set up with JFS or GNF today and get you scheduled out for next year. In that same regard, I guess a lot of the regulation, I see a lot of the big companies now looking at biostimulants. You talked about the mixing bowl, using those more like biological control type pesticides that wouldn't necessarily, I guess, be registered as your traditional pesticide. Do you see that as a big place in pistachios and almonds over the next few years? Most of the companies believe it's going to be the biggest growing segment.
Yeah, so it is one of those things, and you can just see the companies that are being acquired because they have some biostimulants in their lines, like Corteva bought Stoller, who has, various biostimulants that are used kind of around the world, and the U.S. is a little bit late to the game. But it's like anything else where growers want to see ROI on products and services and techs and things like that. So in my own experience, I still need a little bit, probably 2 or 3 more years worth of work, but there are a couple that I'm working with, and I wouldn't say they're difficult to apply. Just the expectations are you have to follow them in a very timely manner, and you have to measure them appropriately, and it takes some work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, well, I mean, we covered a lot. You two have too much knowledge. That's it. Or at least you play around in the field long enough to get in trouble.
Hey, we were going to go 20. We went an hour over that.
No.
I think it's a good conversation. I think that me and Chris could probably go on for 3 hours.
I think we could go for another hour easily. I had about
Man.
7 more questions for
Yeah.
you, but I was like, all right, it's going to be dinner time, I guess, soon. So
I had a little list of my own that we only did about 1 or 2.
well, maybe we do a part 2.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll see.
You were going to ask,
We'll see.
ask me to name an automatopoeia.
Oh,
Yeah.
I get really bad. I don't actually read these before I
All right.
show up.
Come on, name one. Do you have one? Your favorite?
Boom.
Click, clack.
Click, clack.
Or how about boing?
I also like
Doesn't that word
crunch.
just have a ring to it?
Yeah.
Hey, well, I appreciate you guys coming in. A toast to the pistachio industry, and hey, your new job at American Pistachio
Yes,
Growers.
Joe.
That's exciting, Chris. All the future work that you're going to keep doing, I love working with you. So, hey, a toast and thanks.
Thank you for hosting, and good to be on the podcast with you, Joe.
Yep. Same to you, Chris. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for watching The Toast. If you enjoy listening, like, subscribe, and comment. All those help us boost our audience so that more people can hear the messages and the stories that we have on this show. Now, if you know someone that might want to be a guest on The Toast, also DM us or email us, and let's see if we can work that out. Let's keep growing the agriculture community together.